At the heart of Mr. Gurdjieff's teaching is the idea of conscious labours and intentional suffering. What on earth does that mean? Well, it depends who you speak to. If you go to a lot of Gurdjieff groups, and I've been to a few, you'll find there's a certain solemnity around those words. And nobody really tells you why you would want to do that. Why would you want to indulge in labours that are conscious when you could be laying on the couch? And why would you want to intentionally suffer when you don't have to? Well, what all of us are after, or what all of us should be after really, is freedom, inner freedom. And in fact, inner freedom is the only thing that is worth having anyway. And it is the only kind of real freedom there is in any case. You know, having a lot of money doesn't make you free. People who have a lot of money worry about their money. They're not at all free. So this whole thing of conscious labours and intentional suffering needs a bit of clarification, because it's actually fairly easy and straightforward. Most of the Gurdjieff gurus, I don't know whether they do it deliberately or whether they're just dumb, but either way they complicate these matters. So conscious labours should produce intentional suffering. And the reason you want intentional suffering, not just any old intentional suffering, is because you want to be able to become master of your own self, your emotions, primarily. And this is the way that you do it. And I should add, on podcasts like these, in fact, anything you see or hear about Gurdjieff, you need really just to pick the bits out that are useful for you and then discard the rest. And the same with this podcast. Yeah, if there's nothing in this podcast that you find useful, I'm fine with that. If there's just one little thing in here that means something to you and just helps you put another piece of the jigsaw into the puzzle, then that's great. The whole thing's being worthwhile. So, there is just one thing I'd like to add, and that is, if you do not suffer consciously, then life will cause you to suffer unconsciously anyway. So you're kind of stuck with it. You either do it consciously and get something for yourself, or you do it unconsciously and have nothing for yourself. Life just uses you as a chattel, and you're thrown away at the end of the whole, ugly episode. So by the age you're 20, you're probably a mess, internally, emotionally, intellectually, most ways. By the time you're 20, you've been programmed. In the terms of psychologists, you have probably a fairly strong superego. The superego is the bit of you that holds on to ideals and shoulds and shouldn'ts. So you should be nice to people, and you shouldn't steal, and you should be, you should give your seat up to people in trains or on a bus, whatever it is, whatever ideals you have absorbed into your mind. And these things are pushed into you basically by your parents and by people in your school, the education you get. And by the time you're 20, a lot of these ideals that you've picked up will have conflicts between them, but you won't particularly notice it because, to use Gurdjieff's term, you will have buffered it. So you've got this superego which is full of shoulds and shouldn'ts. Then you've got an ego that wants to basically control life, wants to plan out. Not many people at the age of 20 are all that bothered about pensions and things like that, but some people are. And we plan out. We plan our career. We plan our working career, saving money for a pension, our marriage, having kids. The ego does all this stuff. It's basically a planner. It likes things to be all nice and neat and orderly. And in fact, you can measure the amount of ego someone has by how much they need to be in control. And then beneath that is the real part of you, which in psychological terms is called the id. It's basically the animal. And the animal just basically wants to have sex, eat, survive, dominate, those kind of things. And the animal really doesn't give a toss about anything, but the animal is being tamed to some extent by the superego and the ego. So this is what you are at the age 20, a whole pile of contradictions, a whole pile of behaviors that you've acquired that are not natural to you, so they'll cause you suffering. And it resembles really a nice big fat egg yolk, something that can be fed on. Because your essence, the id, the real part of you, the animal part of you, which has been covered over by the ego and superego, is the thing that can be educated and can learn from this nice big fat egg yolk. But what it requires is an act of confrontation within yourself on a fairly regular basis. This all sounds fairly dramatic, but I'll go through the process as we talk through this podcast. So here you are, age 20, or you might be age 60 and still be a mess. In fact, that's the way generally it works. For people who have no notion of challenging what is within them, then they will be effectively dead at the age of 30, in the sense that no change is possible for them afterwards, and they will just live life through as they've been programmed to do by the time they're 30, and then they'll die, and in the words of Gurdjieff or Spinoza, that person then disappears from the universe forever. There's nothing in there that is their own. They've just acquired all this crap from the environment, from parents, from teachers, from peers, from society, from religion, from spiritual groups, you name it. They've just ingested a whole pile of stuff, put together some kind of potpourri of their own, which makes them feel okay with life, and then they just live life through to the end. These lives are never particularly happy lives because there's a whole pile of conflicts going on within. So this egg yolk contains habits, opinions, likes, dislikes, all your emotions, jealousies, envies, depression, obsessions, the will to life, your survival instinct, your need or your desire to dominate, your ambitions, your violence, your sex drive. All of these things are in this big fat egg yolk, and it's there for the taking if you care to do it. So let's talk about how you do this. Well, the first thing you have to do, and it's the starting point in any real spiritual discipline, and let me just digress for a moment on this word spiritual. As I mentioned in other podcasts, it's a word I really don't like, because in truth I don't really know what it means, but I can't think of any other word other than self-development or something like that. But then you get into all the self-help rubbish and all those charlatans. So let me elaborate one really, really, really important thing. You have this egg yolk within you, this nice big fat egg yolk full of habits and desires and passions and hatred and obsessions and loves and all the rest of it. And the only task you need to undertake is to eat that egg yolk. If you are seeking samadhi or enlightenment or moksha or salvation or liberation or whatever, and you haven't gone down into the egg yolk, then nothing's going to happen. You're just living in imagination. Because the thing that you are really after, freedom, joy, those kind of things, are things that you cannot work towards. Really important point. You cannot work towards happiness. The only thing you can do is eat that big fat egg yolk. And then, maybe, once you've gone through that process of eating the egg yolk, those things will come upon you. Happiness, joy, a sense of solidity within yourself, resilience, all the things that make a person strong in life and possibly in death, and that bring higher emotions to a person. The things that we instinctively want. And so all these people who are telling you about enlightenment and moksha and so on, are essentially charlatans. If they are saying, here is the way for you to get to enlightenment, do this meditation or do these practices or come to my $2,000 retreat or whatever it is, they're all charlatans. The self-help thing is charlatanville, because these people are claiming that they have ways to make you happy in life, when actually what you need to do is to go down into, you need to take the escalator down into hell, your own private little hell, because that is where all the juice is, where all the energy is. And in the process of consuming all of that, the big fat egg yolk as I've characterized it, then you start to free up inside and other things can come in. But those other things you cannot go after directly. It doesn't work like that. So anyone who's offering you some practice or whatever to go and get those things is by definition a charlatan, because you need to be going the other way. They need to be saying to you, I can show you how to suffer. That's really what they need to be saying to you. Of course, that's not very attractive for people, because people are living their imaginations. They are always seeking gratification, and so they want the easy hit. Some self-made self-help guy on a YouTube video like me. Anyway, I'm certainly not selling enlightenment here. I would never do that, because I don't know if there's even such a thing, but anyway. So anyway, all these guys who are basically catering to your need for gratification on YouTube or via some course or whatever are charlatans. They don't know what they're talking about. They're either charlatans because they don't know what they're talking about, or they're charlatans quite deliberately. Anyway, having said all that, let's get to this process of eating the egg yolk. The starting point is observation. Until you have some data, there's absolutely nothing for you to work with. And this act of observation sounds simple, but it's very, very difficult. And ideally, and it may take years for a person to get to this point, the observation should not be judgmental, and it should not attempt to modify anything. So let's say that somebody's just run a key down the side of your car, and you feel outraged, just full of anger. The sad fact is that at the very time when you should do this observation, it is exactly the time that you will either forget to do the observation, or you just won't want to do it. So you'll be full of rage, and ideally you should be able to look at the rage within yourself. Typically these emotions are always in the body, so maybe you feel a bit tight across the chest, maybe your arms are tense, whatever it is, you need to be able to sense that, feel it, observe it, because then you start to get some data. And as I mentioned, this is not an easy thing to do. So if you try observation and you don't succeed, then just keep doing it. There's a very good book by a guy called Red Hawk. I've no idea why he calls himself Red Hawk. It sounds a bit pretentious to me, but actually it's a very good book. I think it's called The Manual for Self-Observation or something. Anyway, if you look Red Hawk up on Amazon or whatever, there's a book there that will give you an in to self-observation, probably well beyond what you'll get from any Gurdjieff group, in truth. So there's a starting point, observation. Now there's a step on from this which is even more difficult to do, but it's one thing to see the egg yolk, it's another thing to eat it. So, going back to this scenario where somebody has run a key down the side of your car and you're full of anger, can you sit with that anger without expressing it? Just feel it in your body. Watch the thoughts going through your mind, that bastard who's run the key down, if I get hold of him, watch those thoughts going on. Feel those emotions. And just sit with them and eat them, because that's effectively what you're doing when you do that. That process alone, there are some elaborations, but basically that process alone allows you to eat the egg yolk. It requires total honesty with yourself, and most of us haven't got that. It requires a high degree of courage, and most of us haven't got that. You have to develop these things. And then you can eat the egg yolk. You can say to yourself, I'm envious of that person over there because he's got a better job than me. See, the natural thing that somebody would do is they'd look at that person and say, oh, what a tosser. Look at him parading around. They wouldn't say to themselves, actually, there's nothing wrong with the guy over there. It's my feelings towards him. They're not wrong. They're just more of the egg yolk. And then you also need to understand why you're feeling like that. Now, this is a whole nother avenue, and this podcast has sort of gone on long enough, but I'll very quickly say, you need to understand more of this, the id, the will to life, as Schopenhauer called it. Because unless you understand that, unless you understand the nature of desire, then the observation and the eating of the emotions will not be fully effective. You need also to understand. The understanding is the missing part of it. So the three things: observation, understanding, and eating. If you do not eat your egg yolk, then something else will eat it. I've no idea what. Mr. Gurdjieff states in various, well, certainly in Beelzebub's Tales, what he believes happens. It's not pretty. I'm not going to repeat it because I don't know whether it's true or not. Things about the moon and so on and so forth. But you have to eat this thing yourself. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this act of working on oneself, the conscious labor of doing this, the intentional suffering it produces, eventually frees something up within you for you to start to experience other things. But you cannot go towards the other things directly. They are, sounds a little bit religious, but they are gifts. You can't demand them. If you deserve them, you'll get them. It's the way it works. So, go eat that egg. The problem is that you will need, well, almost everybody needs a teacher. You know, I've had several in my life. Without them, I wouldn't have gone anywhere. So, in one way, this has given you a map, hopefully, of what conscious labor and intentional suffering means. But equally, if you want to do this, you need a teacher. And one of the main reasons is because you are not honest. I'm sorry to say that, but nobody is really honest with themselves. And a teacher will see when you are lying to yourself. And the lying is the most important bit to see, because you're hiding something when you're lying. Anyway, hope that's useful.